Thank you. Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the work that's being done by our government, the Department of State, in putting in place this regime of sanctions. I must admit that I have the same sense that I'm hearing from both the chairman and the ranking member, that we have in our own minds overstated the impact of sanctions. And it obviously depends on the country you're dealing with. There are some countries that if we put sanctions on them, they'll put sanctions on us, and it might be an unfair fight in a setting of that nature. And so I say that in part because I'm looking at the statistics you provided. You know, their stock market is down 34%. Our stock market is down, what, 24% this year. So, you know, it's not the end of the world for Russia if their stock market is down. The ruble is actually trading higher than it was before the war. You note that by 2030, their economy will be 20% smaller. By 2030, that's a long way out. I wonder how much smaller Iran's economy is as a result of the sanctions we've had for a long, crippling sanctions we call them. Do you know what their shrinkage is of their economy over the? I mean, it's at least 30. It's probably 40+%, and yet Iran is still there and selling oil and selling military equipment, and in global markets, if we cut off access to certain technologies that Russia would want to purchase, they can find ways around it. And particularly if their friends are China and India, those are big countries with lots of technology. Some places, of course, will represent gaps. But I think that we have to have a more clear assessment in Congress's mind, in our national psyche, as to just what the impact of sanctions can do. And I know many of my friends think, well, the Chinese better be watching because they're going to see this could happen to them. Well, really? Just what would be the impact if they decided not to let us buy the rare earths and the copper and the cobalt and the lithium that they dominate? And who would be hurting who the most? So I guess I look for a more precise estimate of the impact sanctions will have. Not that we then don't do them. Of course we do. But we want to make sure that we don't overestimate in our own minds and plan on reaction that otherwise would not occur. I guess am I missing this somehow? Am I underestimating this? And I realize we don't have a very clear view of what's happening in Russia. We think some things will be happening, but the indications so far are it wasn't as crippling as we thought on Russia. And I wonder whether that teaches us a lesson that should be important to us as we consider the impact of sanction regimes in the future. And Assistant Secretary, you might lead, and then let me turn to the Ambassador.
Thank you, Senator. I'm happy to address this point. I think you make, there's a couple of things you've said which are essential for us to bear in mind. First, we must be humble, and we cannot rest on our laurels. We must take this long game and be rigorous in how we move forward. What we are seeing in Russia's intensive use, this $100 billion it's spent in fiscal stimulus to try and disguise the true pain of its economy, we must continue to force them to burn through the entirety of the buffers they have in place. It's that motivation which has led us to the price cap policy. The largest source of hard currency that Russia has now is from energy sales. And while we can sever Russia's access to the international financial system with sanctions, and we can impede its ability to earn money in several of its key revenue-generating sectors, it's in energy where we must focus our attention in order to deny Russia that revenue. And without that hard currency, it will not be able to continue to support its economy and to disguise the cratering economic conditions that are occurring.
I certainly concur with regard, but the reality is if a country has oil, they're going to be able to get money for it. And that's, I mean, if we were putting sanctions on a nation that didn't have raw materials and oil, well, those sanctions would be really tough. But with Russia, I mean, we can try and do all sorts of things, but if you got oil and you got gas and you got coal and you got gold, you're going to be able to get money. Yeah. Ambassador?
I think this is really well said, Senator, and it's an issue we struggle with every day. So I agree with you, and particularly being humble about our projections of what will happen. I'll get back to you with the point on Iran. I don't have that with me now. It's a good comparison, though obviously Russia's ambitions under President Putin are very different from Iran's, and so the scale does matter. I agree with the ranking member that the imperial ambition has taken a very serious hit at this point. Now, sanctions are one tool. Ben, I just want to, in Russia, I'll emphasize two pieces in addition to what Assistant Secretary Rosenberg's mentioned. One of them is the measure for me is not how much do they have, it's what can they buy. And that's why I emphasize the export controls and the restrictions on their ability to finance their major purchases, because we see that they can't buy the things they want to use on the battlefield. And this is expanding, and we will keep growing. The second is, this is impossible to quantify. As I mentioned, it's like the effect of soldiers' morale during a battle. At some point, a system becomes so rickety and improvised that it can't succeed. I mean, you had a great career making businesses more efficient and transparent, and Russia is now a system that's built upon improvisations, lies, and guesses. And that just can't go on for long. But it's impossible to put one number against that. But it is how a sanctions program really has an effect.
Thank you.
And then the China point, we can discuss more. Thank you.
Senator